Hi guys, welcome to today's webinar, Simplifying Your Disaster Recovery Plan in an Ever-Changing Landscape. My name is Peter Hunt, I'm the Head of Marketing here at Action Point, and delighted to bring you today's webinar, which I'll be hosting. I'll also be doing some slides later on as well, so do stay with us for that. I guess the reason for bringing you this webinar is we're living in a very, very different workplace than we were pre-COVID, pre-March. Certainly a lot of people have gotten up to speed with remote working, and a lot more people have gotten comfortable with the tools and processes that are afforded to them. With that in mind, cybersecurity has become a bigger and bigger issue. Many people are working from home networks. Many people may not be aware of the cyber threats that exist, and many companies may not have the plan in place should something go wrong, which we hope it doesn't. But I suppose that's the reason for today's webinar. Just I'm going to go through the agenda just really quickly here. So to kick things off, we're going to look at the current environment, and our Commvault expert, Jared Murray, will bring us through that, the known risks and the potential costs. That's quite a lengthy portion of the presentation, so we're actually going to dive straight into the demo and technical overview, where Jared will bring us through what a Commvault dashboard looks like and some of the reporting features that are available to IT managers alike. Then it's over to Jonathan Dean. He'll bring us through disaster recovery simplified and explained, and bring you through Action Point's managed DR service, and we'll give you some detail on that. Then we'll look at our case study, look at a healthcare client, and show how DR really helped them to get back in line after an incident. And then finally, I'll come back on and we'll do some advice on government grants and how to get started. And after that, then we'll do our Q&A. So do bear with us. There's a good bit of content to get through, but we'll try and keep it as interesting and engaging as possible. And please do get your questions in. It's not too often we get two IT experts like Jared and Jonathan for a webinar. So just a bit of an introduction on our speakers. Up first will be Jared Murray, so I suppose I'll start with him. So Jared brings over 20 years of experience to his role as principal sales engineer at Commvault. 12 of those were spent at Commvault, and in that time, Jared has become one of the biggest experts in Europe in the area of backup disaster recovery and the technology set itself. Really excited to hear Jared's thoughts on the current threat landscape and how backup and disaster recovery solutions can help businesses to grow and scale. After that, then we've Jonathan Dean, our own Jonathan Dean, IT Services Director at Action Point. He's been with Action Point since day dot, has really worked through all the technology stacks from 2005 up to the current day. Very excited to get Jonathan on a webinar. I think it's his webinar debut today, so excited to see what he can do and how the process goes for him. So Jonathan works as he's one of our key clients, point of contacts, and really leads the IT team in Action Point, and has done from its very inception up to 100 staff now, and four offices worldwide. So great to get Jonathan on the webinar. Before I hand over to Jared, I'm just going to launch a quick poll. And it'll make sense in a second when Jared goes through his first slide. But the question on the poll is, how much is a percentage of an average IT budget do you think is spent on keeping the lights on? So this is in your opinion. How much of a percentage of an IT budget do you think is spent on keeping the lights on? Please select one. Up to 40%, up to 60%, up to 75%, up to 90%. So I'll give you 20 or 30 seconds just to answer all those questions. And in that time, I'm just going to ask Jonathan to hand over to Jared. And Jared can take us through the first portion of today's presentation, Understanding the Threat Landscape. Let's give that an extra couple of seconds. And I'm going to close that poll down.
Fantastic. Thank you, Peter, for that introduction. Good morning, everybody. Jared Murray is from Commvault, is my name. Yeah, so I'm going to, as Peter said, I'm going to take you through the first part of the webinar today, basically, where we're looking to understand what the current modern, I suppose, landscape looks like. You know, what modern IT systems look like, and what challenges these systems face. So let me just move that forward. Right. So really what we're talking about here is, bottom line is, organizations need answers to complex challenges, and what doesn't help that is the idea that, you know, data management, you know, and data fragmentation is really, I suppose, a factor as we see environments, they've changed dramatically over the last 10 years or so, where everything used to be much more centralized. Now it's distributed across sites, applications, operating systems, hypervisors, public cloud, private cloud, O365. It's quite difficult, and becomes more and more difficult to track that, manage it, keep it all under observation and reporting. And that generates its own management complexity. You've got that kind of distribution, that's scale, as I say. It's very difficult to keep a visibility on the entire data set. To know your data really is becoming more and more of a challenge. And obviously, with that management complexity, it becomes difficult to maintain skills across all systems, because when you think about like a modern environment, you're going to have on-premise systems, on-premise control elements. You're going to have other bespoke or specific systems that align to specific types of data, like for example, the Azure portal, or cloud-specific solutions for management, on-premise management solutions, on-premise provisioning. As I say, it's difficult to maintain skills across them all. Every organization tries to avoid lock-in, because it doesn't help in terms of being able to be workload migration, to be flexible, and to be in the best possible position that you can from a data perspective. So lock-in is a real consideration. That comes from many levels, whether it's hardware lock-in, cloud lock-in, appliance lock-in. These are all things that we need really, I suppose, try to avoid. And then the final one is trying to address compliance and the recovery readiness, which is a piece that we're looking at today. Again, compliance is an ever-changing landscape. Everything from GDPR, FOI, litigation, standard compliance, etc., audits. Again, it's a world there of, again, it can be very difficult, as I say, to align that to this type of a climate. So this then is a recent survey conducted by ESG from February, which talks about some of the key factors that affect or impact recoverability. So, and these are quite surprising, I thought myself, is that 60% of organizations, as you can see there, have suffered a ransomware attack in the last year, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. And 64% of IT execs consider their environment to be more complex than they were 2 years ago. So that goes back to that point. And 52% see a skills shortage purely because of that complex and the direction that the systems are going. And then the fourth one is that number one on that kind of modernization priorities list is backup, with automation in second place. And those two topics, backup is really about recovery, but automation is crucial within that recovery landscape. And as I say, part of very central in the discussion that we're having today around DR preparedness and recovery. Okay, so that takes us to the poll. So then that takes us to the poll.
Up there, Ger.
So we've got quite a lot. 40% are suggesting it's up to 75%, which you would consider, quite a lot of a spend. But in fact, according to ESG, the answer is up to 90%. Up to 90% of IT budget is spent on keeping the lights on, which is a huge number. And I think it comes again from these points: the complexity, skills shortage, etc., lack of automation in many cases is a real kind of driver for that spend. So to go back to DR preparedness or recovery readiness, as we call it from a common perspective, we have to look at what does a threat landscape looks like. So we've got, as you can see on the slide there, internal and external threats, and these are becoming more and more common reasons for DR. Reasons for DR are more related to threats such as like a malicious actor, somebody who is from the organization and that intentionally deletes data or intentionally steals data. or credentials associated to it, or in some cases it's accidental. You know, there's always some space for human error, accidental deletions, just to accidentally press the wrong button, etc., which leads to a delete. Or there's the external threats, which we maybe, when we think about threats, we're probably thinking about external ones more readily, like, you know, the ones that take the limelight sort of thing is, and the headlines are malware and ransomware. But then there's also those individual situations where, you know, individual actors or external elements try to access company data to either delete it or to disrupt service, like denial of service, for example, or to try and hack accounts or credentials. So and given that hardware, software, the platforms, etc., have become much more reliable over time, a much higher percentage of the threats and the reasons to invoke DR are related to these type of situations. Take it on to the next slide. And you'll have seen these type of headlines. You know, this one's from March. You know, COVID-19 drives phishing emails up by 667%. Again, this is, you know, the remote working, I suppose, brought a whole new attack surface for you know, for the threat actors, basically, where they can now target remote workers where maybe they're in an unusual situation, a situation that they're not used to, for example, and then it's maybe easier to get access to them. Similarly, ransomware is on the increase. I'm sure you'll have seen these the stats around the ransomware increase, and again, it's in that sort of similar time frame where there's some visibility, I suppose, and the individuals behind this see this as an opportunity maybe to make some impact. And you can see there the sectors that are most at risk are you know, financial, healthcare, and manufacturing, which is probably, again, no surprise. So again, more than ever, we got to be in front of those type of risks and the threats and the outcomes from these risks. So when we think about those, again, going back to those internal, external threats, what do they result in when, you know, if we're unfortunate enough to be hit by one of them? In a lot of cases, if we get hit by a ransomware or a malware or some sort of a denial of service, we're probably going to end up with a potentially missing backup data, where the backup data is deleted, disruption of service. So that's, you know, it can result in data loss because maybe we don't have the full spectrum of recovery available to us. It may result in a theft if the data has been able to leave the organization. Or a corruption, like broad spectrum corruption, where in a ransomware situation where all of our data gets corrupted or encrypted and is not available. But on this, in addition to, you got to consider how quickly we can recover. So downtime is a big issue here. So if we do get hit by an issue, how long is it going to take us to recover? So even when we have resolved the issue, there's still going to be a period of time where we don't have access. So that is as much of an issue as anything else. But certainly we need to, without a shadow of a doubt, do everything in our power to avoid a situation where we have no ability to recover data. That's everybody's worst nightmare. So front and center in terms of what we need to be concerned about in light of these attacks and threats and current considerations is, number one, how do we make sure that all of the data that is stored on our backup infrastructure is protected from malware and ransomware? So that's absolutely crucial. So we normally operate on that 3-2-1 type rule, where 3 copies of the data on 2 different types of media with 1 offsite. So it's a good kind of baseline to understand that, you know, regardless of the breadth of the attack, that if we stick to that rule and we introduce as many obstacles as we possibly can from a security, from a ransomware protection, from an air gapping and so forth, that we can make sure that we have access to that data. We also have got to make sure that all of our data is protected all of the time. So that's where automation comes in. That's where a solution like Commvault that has a breadth of capability, you know, across as much data and workloads as possible, so that we can consolidate everything under one interface, one index, one pane of glass, which we'll look at in a second in the demo, it becomes more and more important. We also need to make sure that we can, any recoveries we do are valid. So we've got to test, make sure that we can recover, validate our recovery points, and make sure that we, as well as being able to recover, that the data we recover is in fact valid and good and consistent. And build in checks and balances. Business logic workflows is should be part of all systems to avoid those internal threats, to avoid accidental deletion or other malicious activity where we build in an approver and a reviewer stage into actions that affect data, like a deletion or configuration changes. So there has to be an oversight. So that's where the business logic comes in. And then the final thing is to make sure that the solutions is hardened as much as possible, that the OS, the application itself, and all of the associated services are hardened and be as resistant as possible to attack. Because I suppose in terms of that reality check, as the slide says, and the high line here is that the protection piece is not enough. 75% of companies infected with ransomware were running up-to-date protection. So in many cases, that whole landscape changes so quickly, and malware and ransomware and these attacks become more and more intelligent all of the time. It's very difficult for the protection to be 100% all of the time. So that's where we got to have that fallback from as I said, from the data protection from DR. The other stat there that's surprising, I suppose, is not surprising. I suppose 34% of businesses take more than a week to regain access, and a week, as we all know, in business is a long time. So again, it's about trying to reduce that downtime. Crucial. So the effect or the issue is the first thing, but to reduce the downtime is the second thing. It's probably as critical as the first. And also 58% of threats come from within an organization. So again, we can concentrate a lot on the external threats and the malware and the ransomware, etc., but we also have to consider our own internal threats. And this is a quote from Craig Lawson in Gartner, which relates back to that 75% of companies that do have an issue, even though they have the protection. So the prevention approach does fail, bottom line. So we do have to have, as I say, that belt and braces, that step back potential. Are traditional backup methods fit for purpose? And in many cases, they're not, when we think about those new threats, because those new threats, they're not catered for in the traditional business continuity plan, where, for example, we're thinking about redundancy, we're thinking about hardware failure, or we're thinking about site failure or a flood, or so it's redundant, or it's clustered, or it's replicated. These are no good when if a deletion occurs, we just replicate the deletion, or if ransomware or an encryption occurs, we just replicate or we cluster the encryption. These are more related to availability rather than recovery or data consistency. Similarly, backups in their own right are versioning. It's easily, if you don't have immutability or separation between your production and your tier 2 copies, then things like just straightforward backup, BAK files or versions in like a OneDrive, they're no good. Ransomware gets past that really easily. Deletions, as I say, do too. Similarly, with like a litigation hold in a OneDrive mailbox, or sorry, an O365 mailbox, it's only as good as the containers. If there's anything happens to that container in terms of a deletion or again a ransomware attack, then the item retention and litigation hold are rendered useless. Because the reality of a significant cyber attack means that organizations don't have any communications. There's no networks, there's no DNS, there's no Active Directory, potentially even no hardware to recover, because it's not possible to salvage it. A ransomware is so embedded, it's if we can't use it as a recovery, we can't use it again. All of our replicated copies are compromised. There's nothing to say that backup copies, if they're not properly isolated, they could also be encrypted. There's delays with cloud recovery. These always have to be factored in SLAs from cloud. and the test scenario did not cover this types of severity. So we've seen situations with cyber attack where customers, and some of them were quite well publicized, where customers are left with very little more than WhatsApp for communications, a few temporary O365 accounts, and paper, back to pen and paper, a situation where no business wants to be. But as I say, it can very easily be a reality. Yeah, and as that last point says, the attack is so massive, companies don't know where to start. So to think about this, and one of the enablers that helps, certainly on the back perspective, from a recovery perspective, is artificial intelligence. It's part of that security framework for quite a while, and the adjacent systems, but it's now made its way into backup solutions. Commvault being one of them that uses AI for a number of reasons. And again, it's to try and assist with the automation. It's try to assist with the alerting on attack, and to identify an anomaly, as it talks about there. Anomalous activity, in file servers on laptops, so we can do that kind of early warning against unusual issues or unusual activity on systems. Use the policies to be intelligent around scheduling, around retention, around service, being able to adhere or deliver the service level that's put forward, being able to be intelligent around presenting alerts from event viewers that are specific, and being proactive, being able to identify issues before they become a risk, before it becomes an issue. Like, for example, maybe a password that doesn't meet, or that's too weak, for example, or that the two-factor authentication maybe isn't turned on, or that we don't have the ransomware protection enabled. These are all different use cases for AI, and something that actual administrators don't have to get involved in on a regular basis. So that it becomes the solution itself, polices itself, if you like, and it makes sure that the solution, is in its best possible place to deliver the expected outcome. But going back to the very, very start, when we talk about complexity in environments and data fragmentation, one of the uniques about the Commvault solution, because it's a data platform, so it's not just a backup solution, it's backup and recovery and archive and search and discovery, but it also has a very broad scope in terms of workload integration, which is very beneficial in, as I say, in a fragmented environment, where we then don't have, organizations have fewer solutions to manage, to administer, and to report against. So therefore, when we look at this slide here, everything from SaaS apps, containers on the left-hand side, big data like GPFS or Hadoop, business apps, all the way through to your on-premise VMs or on-premise physical, public and private cloud, and data centers, endpoints, desktops and laptops. So 365 comes in there, OneDrive. We can bring it all under that one framework, one index. It's one reports interface. So this makes the whole ability to understand where we are from a service level, from an RPO, RTO, from a data perspective, so much easier. We're not, and it ticks the box on the skills gap. We have one solution to understand. So it makes, as I say, it brings distributed environments, data fragmentation back into a central. It makes it central from a tier 2, from a recovery perspective. And that's really just to kind of put some names on that breadth. When we look at storage hardware all the way through to SaaS and cloud native, these are recognizable names. There's a breadth of integration there. As I said, there's a wealth of integration. It's built because the solution has been around for 20 years, so it's using things that we've built out many years ago, but now are applicable. Whether it's in cloud or whether it's on premise, we've got that sort of the latest and greatest integration with the likes of Docker and Kubernetes, as well as being able to back up SQL 2005 or Windows 2003 or something that's legacy at this point. So that takes me on to the demo. Just spend a couple more minutes. I think we're doing okay on time, Peter. I think, are we?
Yeah, we're doing good. Yeah.
Cool. So let me just switch presenter to over here. I'm going to show my screen. Can we see that?
Perfect. Thank you.
Good stuff. Okay, so just a few minutes, just to kind of touch on a few things that I've just talked about, and just to maybe bring it into reality a little bit when we see what the interface looks like. So this is the Commvault interface. We call it Command Center, restore focused, heavily restore focused, driving the outcomes that we need from a DR, from a recovery perspective. The focus here is service level. It's crucial, right? We're not really concerned about the success of individual backups or the success of individual restores. We are concerned about the service level, making sure that we have successful backups, we have successful restores, but we also have the level of retention required, the level of security wrapper around those, and also the ability to recover in a readiness, so be ready for that recovery. Health section over here talks about, it's all about proactivity. It's all about being able to understand issues before they occur. One of them is quite an interesting one. It just is what we call a security assessment. It lines up with what we talked about the doing everything that's possible to ensure that backup copies are secure. So this identifies issues before they occur, like, for example, login attempts, or password complexity and various other things, all the way down. That file anomaly alerting is not turned on. So it tells us about these things so that we understand that these are gaps. We've already talked about the coverage that's available, from hypervisors through to physical servers and database and cloud systems endpoints, applications like Office 365, cloud applications like Salesforce or AWS, these are only a few. There's quite a lot more in behind the scenes, G Suite. So you can see from just that section of the GUI, we can address a lot of an organization workload without leaving this interface. Plus the reports then that we use apply to all of that data. So we don't have to go outside of this into multiple locations to understand what the landscape looks like. Recovery readiness is a really important report, because it allows us to model preparedness. It allows us to understand at any point in time how quickly or otherwise we can recover. So are we adhering to RPO and RTO for all of our workloads? And this is machine learning driven. So up top, we can you can model any recovery point you like, any recovery point or any recovery time, and then it displays them down along here. By default, it's going to model it there on. It's modeling a 4-hour there, but you can see some of them do meet, some don't. But this is our chance, right? Before the DR actually happens, this is our chance to understand, what could I do for that Amazon workload to make sure that I can hit my 4-hour RPO? Is it a data volume issue that I just can't get it across the network quickly enough, or whatever? But at least I've got visibility now. I can model, as I say, this at any point in time, and that's backed up by, you've got your straightforward schedules and your normal backup and recovery type mechanisms, which will work for quite a lot of your workloads. That's all about the data classification. But those with more aggressive RPOs, we do have the integrated replication capability that allows us to do things like cross-platform migrations and so forth. But again, it's been able to meet RPOs. It's been able to meet the ones that are more aggressive than that we could meet under normal circumstances. And it's all driven, as I say, simplicity is critical, automation is critical, all driven through plans, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really just a snapshot, I think, of the Commvault interface. And I think that's it from me. I think I'm going to hand back to the guys.
Cool.
Thanks, Gerard.
Thanks, Gerard. 2 seconds there while I take over. Okay. So hopefully you're seeing the right screen.
All good, Jonathan.
Oh, mighty. Good morning, and thank you for attending this webinar. As Peter has explained, this is my first one, so please be patient. Right, so basically, Gerard has shown us the Commvault software there and has set the scene in terms of modern risks that we face and how we protect against it. What I'm going to cover off is, I suppose, to talk through some of the process that we go through when we are designing a DR plan for a client. So, you know, there's a number of kind of sections that we would go into, but the first and foremost is we need to work with the client to discuss and learn their risks. And, you know, every business is different. I mean, we work with insurance brokers, with contact centers, you know, with healthcare providers, and, you know, there's different risks in every business. But, you know, the first thing to understand anyways is the risks that are specific to that business that need to be mitigated. You can't cover every scenario, but, you know, it's the scenarios that are most likely to happen and that would have the biggest impact that we need to really get under the hood with. So, you know, to give you an example, you know, we were working with a contact center client in Cork, and we've been working with them nearly 10 years at this stage. And I suppose initially when we were consulting with them, the kind of risks were maybe the more common ones, you know, the loss of a building, the loss of power, you know, the loss of communications, and things like that. And when we were working with them, we realized that the business park that they were in, they had their 2 buildings on either side of the business park. But, you know, if they had a fire in their primary building, the fire marshals would have cut off access to the whole business park, so they would have lost access to both their buildings. And again, they were then able to build it into their long-term plan about, you know, their second location being a bit further away. And, you know, it took 4 years, but eventually they moved their second location. The other thing then is, next to the business park, there's a chemical processing plant. And, you know, had that had a fire or an issue, the entire business park could have been closed. And again, you know, the only way to mitigate against that is being further away. But as time has gone on, you know, the kind of risks that that particular client is looking to address have changed. You know, a lot of their clients would be more web-based now, using more cloud-based CRMs, and their staff would be connecting to these. And while we would have designed a highly resilient network, one of the things that they were looking to do is to mitigate some of the penalties in their contracts. And we would have worked with them to, you know, understand how do they price their contracts. And then, you know, one of the things would be around a partial loss of service for a client versus a total loss of service for a client. And there would be different penalties. So as part of a data center and network refresh, we were able to assist them in redesigning how the building was laid out. And we were able to divide the building into different availability zones. And the whole idea here is different parts of the campus could go down, but the contracts would be spread amongst these availability zones so that no one contract would suffer a total loss of service and therefore minimize their exposure for penalties. And by understanding that and understanding what the, you know, the kind of costs that were involved should they have an incident, they were very easily able to justify the spend around making those kinds of changes to their infrastructure and their premises. And then with that same client, as the years have gone on, things have been a little bit serendipitous. They've made some changes around how their workforce works. Like a lot of companies, they were having trouble attracting new staff in the contact center space. So they wanted to change how they work so that they could attract more part-time staff and get people working from home and from you know, these local business hubs and things like that. And would you believe it, the project to get all of that in place was completed in January of this year, just in time for COVID. So they were very lucky indeed. But yeah, so different businesses have different risks. You need to understand the risks, and every solution has to be designed to mitigate those risks. So I touched a little bit there on the cost of downtime for a client. By understanding your cost of downtime, it makes it easy to justify the cost of putting in place a solution to mitigate risk. I might just touch on an insurance client of ours. They have a very unusual way of calculating the cost of downtime. For them, when they sell an insurance policy, they break even in year one. They really want you to stick around and renew in year 2 and year 3. And so for them, they take the value of your policy over 3 years and how much money they make over it, and then they take it as, if they have downtime and they don't make that sale, they look at the 3-year lifetime of that policy, because they have a good handle on their costs. They know how much their Google ad spend is, their TV adverts are, and all of that. So they know, to get that particular sale, what it's actually costing. And because they have good visibility of their cost of downtime, it became very straightforward to justify the expense of putting in place the right protections. Some of the other things that we need to cover off with clients is you need to put yourself in your user's shoes. You need to understand where the data is and how your users interact with that data. So that often involves sitting with different staff members while they go about their daily work, just to get an understanding of it. You might have a payroll application that has a database on the back end and a fat client and is quite chatty and needs a lot of network performance. You could have something that's totally in the cloud and accessible via a web browser. And I suppose the solutions around keeping those available and protecting those, varies depending on the applications. There's some of our clients would have very, very, very detailed, disaster recovery plans, and they cover off some really, really mundane things. There's a multinational client of ours, they're in the privileged position where they have a primary facility and then a warm site, and they spread some of their staff between them. But in the event that they have a problem in their primary facility and they bus their staff over to the second facility, they even have it worked out how many extra rolls of toilet roll they need available to handle the extra staff on site for the day. I don't think there's many of us calculate the amount of toilet roll you need in your DR plan. So yeah, so basically getting to grips with where your data is, how it's stored, in what format, it ties, it's an important part of designing the solution. And the likes of Commvault has some fantastic tools for classification of data and understanding where your data is and providing the best possible protection mechanism. In terms of sitting in the user's shoes, we have seen DR solutions that protect the data and make the data available. But again, I'm going to use a payroll application as an example. There's one client of ours would use a solution called Quantum. It essentially has a Microsoft Access backend. It needs very fast access to it, and even though their server had been DR'd, when they would open up their client and open up their VPN client, when they would open up the Quantum front end and they'd open up their VPN client, the application was practically unusable. So given that they run a weekly payroll, something that would take about 3 hours in the morning was actually going to take a day and a half because of the poor performance of the application. Now again, you were able to design an add-on to the solution where the Quantum payroll front end was available in a remote desktop services server, a light one, sitting close to the replicated data. to make the application as usable as it was on the person's computer. So sometimes you do have to consider, how the end user, how things are going to feel for the end user when they're working during a disaster. So yeah, and it's very, very important to understand what data is in use, and I might touch on that a little later with an example. Yeah, so in terms of like data loss, it's very important to understand what is actually active data and what is archived data. We had a financial firm who'd done a number of acquisitions, and they would have inherited, they would have brought on board the staff as part of acquisitions, and they would have brought on board their data, and we would have merged file servers together. This particular client, they have a cloud-based backup, and because there was essentially a lot of duplication after the mergers, they wanted to keep a static copy of file shares from their acquirees. The cost of keeping that, became prohibitive. We carried out a bit of an analysis with the business owner, and it was determined that a network share was actually an archive. We took a once-off backup of it and put it to one side. Now, 6 months elapsed after that, and it turns out in those 6 months, some of the staff in the from one of the acquisitions was actually continuing to use that data, and rather than being an archive, it was actually a live network share. The guys got hit with a bit of ransomware, and everything was restored off the most recent backups. But unfortunately, because what was deemed an archive share wasn't actually an archive, a number of users ended up losing their live data. So it's very, very important to understand why what data is active. And Commvault has tools built into it to look at data use and to highlight those data that's actually in use and data that's not in use regularly. So it's very important to deploy those tools and use those tools to know your data. It's quite dangerous when you don't. So I might just talk about a healthcare client of ours that relatively recently suffered a crypto attack, and how, because they had the right systems in place, it's actually quite a good news story. So this client, they would have a VMware environment, they would have shared storage, and they would have a Commvault backup solution. The backup solution is properly air-gapped from the production environment. And essentially, somebody in accounts receivable, who'd already gotten like 100 emails that day with just a subject of invoice and a PDF with invoice and the name attached, went and opened up yet another PDF. And unfortunately, there was a payload in it. It was a 0-day, and it infected their computer. And this was shortly before lunch. The person had a bit of a problem trying to use their computer after it, but headed off on lunch. When people came back around 2 o'clock, there was reports came into the help desk of people being unable to access different files and network share. So then, once our engineers on the desk realized what was going on, our incident management process kicked in. We established a bridge with the client. We logged in, and we were able to, on their network switches, cut off all of the computers, all of the desktops. We were able to log on to their virtual environment, and they had 19 VMs. We were able to disconnect their network cards, and we were able to have a look at the servers. Now, this client was lucky in many regards. They would have had some very tightly controlled permissions. So most users couldn't really do much other than what they needed to do as part of their daily job. After examining the servers, you know, it was essentially the network shares that this particular user had. The data on those shares got encrypted, but it looks like, you know, the malware was unable to spread from that person's computer to any other computer. So then, a little bit after 4 o'clock, we were able to essentially, we were quite confident that the contamination was on just one computer and those network shares. Now, unfortunately, you know, there was quite a number of network shares spread across quite a number of servers that this person had access to. And we were also able, we were quite confident as well that the infection wasn't actually active on any of those servers. But after a chat with our management team, we were able to, they were willing to accept, you know, the loss of some of the day's work. The most recent snapshot available of their environment was from 10 o'clock that morning. We were able to use Commvault to essentially reinstate the 19 VMs to the way they were at 10 o'clock that morning. And we were able to reintroduce all of the other workstations back onto that network, apart from the infected one. And essentially, we had them ready to go at 5:30 there. Now, again, this client, you know, their operating hours are 6 in the evening till 9 in the morning. So they were ready for, you know, production to start at 6 o'clock. So I suppose they were quite lucky in that regard. But look, because they had a proper high performance backup solution in a proper air-gapped fashion, we were able to very quickly restore a clean copy of the data. So it's a, you know, quite a good story. I suppose that's, you know, when things are done right, it gives you plenty of options. You know? So that's our case study on that. And I'm going to hand over to Peter, who's going to go through some government funding options.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Thank you for that presentation, Jonathan. Very insightful as ever. And I have a few questions for the Q&A just after that as well. So very much appreciate it. Quick summary of some of the government funding, guys. So, okay, we've talked about the solution. We've talked about some of the possible services that Action Point can provide. But now, how the hell do we pay for it? Thankfully, I suppose Enterprise Ireland and the Local Enterprise Office have been very, very quick to respond to COVID-19. I suppose some of the initial requests that would have came in from bricks and mortar businesses was like, how do we get online? So I'm going to talk specifically at the EIL business continuity voucher, which really feeds into the stuff we're talking about with Commvault and Action Point's managed DR. So basically, this is from Enterprise Ireland. So to access the voucher, you need to be an Enterprise Ireland client. The voucher is up to €2,500. And is used basically to explore and to do some consultancy and advisory services. So I've listed out there's 5 project categories, but I suppose stuff that's really specific to Action Point and the stuff that we're actively responding to at the moment might include introducing new business practices in order to increase productivity. So that could be something as simply as, you know, how to use Microsoft Teams more effectively, how to better manage return to work protocols more effectively, how to automate workflows within Teams, documentation, and that kind of thing. And you know, we can really consult and help you with that. And Finny Nally, our head of cloud, would be a great guy to talk to on stuff like that. If we're looking specifically at the content today, I suppose developing process for risk assessment and analysis for business continuity. Now, I'm not saying you're going to get your appliance set up and your DR all set up, but the points that Jonathan is mentioning there, you know, down to how risk assessment of clients, possible loss of money if the business is to fail or if a system is to go down. It's that kind of, I suppose, you know, nitty gritty detail that the Action Point kind of provide, and I think it's that type of stuff. It's really good to get the ball rolling, especially in the current environment. And the final piece there, you know, develop a strategy for and/or investigate feasibility of doing business online. Like if we look at just some clients of ours, you know, many have a customer portal. If you look at our work with Department of Foreign Affairs, we're kind of experts in that area. And I'm looking at some of the audience members here today, and you know, you may have part of your business that you can move online and you want to do so quickly. So I think that's where Action Point come in. We look at the feasibility of an application or of an online portal, and all of a sudden you can reduce footfall into the branch, and you can drive more traffic online. And you know, certainly the planning process we can get through in an agile fashion, and then we can look at some options thereafter for product development. So just to mention on that, I guess from our own perspective, if we're looking at business continuity and DR, what the team in the background here have worked on really hard over the last few weeks, I suppose, is condensing a business continuity plan or an IT review. So basically, it's 5 steps, and it's covered under the voucher at 2.5K. Now, if you can't get access to the voucher, if you're not an enterprise Ireland client, that's absolutely fine. Come talk to us. We'll be able to pass on that pricing. So kind of 5 stages into it: perform a technical review of the following IT areas. So server infrastructure, email infrastructure, data application, backup and DRs we're chatting there, firewalls, IT security. So really in-depth review of all those areas. We'll report on findings. We'll use industry best standard and compare them to your current situation. Compile the as is and to be IT infrastructure states. So that's risk classification recommendations. Compile project roadmap with cost estimated to address key risks identified during the IT review. So again, this is the roadmap. This is what we come back to the board with. We've looked at our findings, we've looked at the risk assessment, and now you have a document that you can act upon or that you can get sign off or approval on. And then, yeah, the final piece then is the findings and recommendations where we present back to your key stakeholders. That whole package costs 2.5K. So we're very keen to chat to anyone who even has an inkling of an interest, or might be curious whether they're an EI client or whether they might even qualify for the voucher. So if you contact your sales account manager for an existing client, or if you're not, email getstarted@actionpoint.ie, and we'll be glad to talk you through that process. If you're wondering if you're eligible for the vouchers, talk to your development advisor, TA at Enterprise Ireland, or check out the URL. And I'll be providing all these slides at the end with your post-webinar email. And I think that is about it from me. I just want to click on to the last slide. Brilliant. So at this stage, I'm going to open the floor to any questions, but I just want to thank both our speakers here today. I want to thank the guys in CMS distribution as well for facilitating this webinar. Shout out to Emma and Breach there. So brilliant. So look, guys, we're here for the next 10 minutes or so. I know we've been through a lot of content, but you know, now is your chance to kind of talk to some of our experts, Jordan Murray or Jonathan Dean. But I suppose I'll just kick it off there, Jonathan, just to start it off, if you want to flick on your mic. You know, you went through, you know, I suppose the borderline gory detail of, you know, doing a DR assessment and setting up your DR effectively. But I guess, you know, the technology is one thing, but really, what do Action Point offer in that whole process, Jonathan?
So, you know, I suppose really you have to get under the skin of the client. You know, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the user. You know, when we conduct an in-depth IT review, you know, we have to interview, as well as the IT staff and management. You know, it's good to interview some of the end users of different systems to kind of get a real feel of how things work. And you use that feedback when you're designing the DR solution then, or business continuity solution, to mitigate the different risks that are there, but while keeping a firm handle on the usability of the system. It's very, very important.
Excellent, excellent. And Jared, maybe a question for you. So a lot of people out there are maybe using a different backup solution provider. They might have a very fragmented IT architecture for whatever reason. You know, what's the key first step, or maybe what's the message for the IT manager out there today?
Yeah, I guess it's, you know, a lot of cases probably, you know, to understand that data set a little bit more, you know, define, look at what the business requirements, what are the business asking from a recovery perspective, from a service level perspective, even from a retention, or if you move into compliance from a deletion perspective, and then consider whether the tool set that you've got there today covers that, whether it ticks that kind of simplification type box, or whether there's a use case for Commvault in that arena as a single point, something that will deliver against all of those asks, something that will analyze your data set to begin with, help you with the classification, give you that coverage, and give you that kind of future scale and ability to move forward as the environment changes, and give you that I suppose the mobility that everybody's looking for really too.
Okay. It all starts with a little bit of a review. I have a couple of questions in here. Guy James asks, what kind of internet connection would Commvault need when backing up in-house infrastructure? Currently have 250 megabits up and 250 down.
Bottom line is there's no minimum really. It's about change rate. So it's about the data volume at that endpoint and the change rate on the data. And if 250 megs will cover it, then we're good to go. So it's bottom line is change. Commvault's going to be as efficient as it possibly can on that link. We'll do things like the source side deduplication, source side compression. We'll run what we call a data pipe. It's high efficiency protocol. But bottom line is it's about change rate and whether or not that line can keep up.
Yeah, I would agree that it's all about change rate, but also understanding your change rate at different points in the day. So we would normally use a tool called Live Optics to analyze the amount of data being written across the environment. And, we would look for where the peaks are. So, we would have some clients where, they're quite busy in the morning, and the amount of change builds up. And then it takes a couple of hours for that to get replicated across. So, there would be points in the day where their recovery point objective might drift out. And there'll be other points of the day where the recovery point objective is quite tight, and it's about understanding your rate of change at different points of the day, and then agreeing what that recovery point objective is with your management team.
Very good. Thanks for that. Thanks for that contribution, Jonathan. I've one question here. I suppose we're running a little bit tight in time, but we might have time for one more if people want to get that ask in. Question here from Vincent. If a company required a high-level health check focused on the current as-is DR process to sense check the current process, do ActionPoint have a process to do this? So process being the key word there. But I guess if people want to do a high-level health check on the current as-is DR, what can ActionPoint do from Jonathan?
Yeah, look, exactly. If you have an existing process, we would come in and, I suppose, essentially do a cut down version of a review. We would look at the process that you currently have, look at, speak to the management team and make sure that the risks you hope that this current plan mitigates, that it actually does, and essentially we can do a sanity check around that. And if it turns out that it doesn't properly mitigate some of the risks, or the plan might be a couple of years old and may not be 100% relevant to the way the business is now, we can work with you to find the gaps in that and come up with solutions, or I suppose help you set the correct expectations around the plan that you have.
Excellent. Yeah, that's kind of it from the Q&A, guys. So look, I'm just going to take this opportunity maybe just to thank both our speakers today. Great to work with Jared for the first time, and Jonathan, you played a blinder. Really great to chat to the guys today. I really enjoyed the content, and it kind of moves away from some of the remote work and focus stuff that we've done in the past. I suppose from our own perspective, look, you can check out actionpoint.ie for the range of services that we have. You can send a follow-up email to any of your account managers, or indeed to me or Jonathan as well. Look, keep an eye out on our Academy webpage, and I'll put a link into the follow-up email as well, where we'll be running more of these webinars in the future. And we've got a quick survey afterwards as well. So please, if you have any feedback on content you'd like to see in the future, please leave it in the survey. We're very keen to hear from you, because we want to produce the best content for our audience. So yeah, I suppose without further ado, thanks a million to Jonathan and Jared, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Take care.
Thank you.